Hello, I'm the Pink Phantom, and this is my podcast. Join me as I delve into the world of games and gaming, and especially old school RPGs. Together, let's voyage into the astral realm and check out my Phantom thoughts. And the calls just keep on coming. So, we're doing this again. I've got calls from Joe from Hindsightless Podcast, Jason from the Nerds RPG Variety Cast, uh, Daniel from the Bandits Keep Podcast and Media Empire. A lot of topics covered, so let's get to it. And I want to go ahead and thank everybody who called in, and you will find all the uh, links to their various podcasts in the show notes, as always. So let's get to it.
What's going on, Pink Phantom? Just got finished listening to your latest episode. I think episode 83. It was your latest call-in episode. So I'm calling about the call-ins to keep the call-ins rolling in. Anyway, I'm actually not calling about any of the calls. I'm calling about two specific things that you said that coalesced in my brain to form one thought. So let's talk about them. The first one was when you were responding to the call about the DM tropes, and you were talking about the DM trope of the dungeon master who wants to run their fantasy novel and who railroads their players through the fantasy novel. And then later on, when you were responding to Merc about how you run your solo games, you were talking about how you wanted to take a look and see how the hobgoblins, where everybody was situated, so you could get a better feel for your world. And those two separate thoughts came together in my brain to make me think, if somebody really says they have a fantasy novel and they're going to run a party through it, if that party can't go off the rails, I don't think it's a very well written novel. I don't think it's a fleshed out world. I don't think it's a well rounded novel. Like, if you have a fantasy world that you're setting your novel in, you should be able to run whatever in that world, so it all makes sense. So yeah, I don't know, man. Like, not only is it a trope, it's a trope of a bad author. Like, I bet Tolkien could run some sick RPGs in Middle Earth, or Robert Jordan in The Wheel of Time, or any fantasy author you want to pick could run games in their world because they know their world. Because I think, especially for fantasy, you really should know your world as much as you can. And yeah, man, that's that's where my brain went. So thank you for that. Anyway, dude, you're doing awesome stuff. Take it easy and peace out.
So if I'm hearing you right, we actually should be looking for those GMs with that unpublished fantasy novel to play with. Yeah! Yeah, frustrated novelists are the best GMs. Wait, was that the sound of some heads exploding? Anyway, thank you for calling in, Joe. Yeah, I think you're right. I think that the the game masters that have a vast fantasy world put together in their brains would be able to go off the rails. They wouldn't have to have just a single story being told in that, and that the players could be free to explore and chase the side character that only has, half a page devoted to their entire existence in the novel, and then they can be friends with them and flesh them out for the next series of novels that the GM hasn't written yet. What if, hey, how about the GM that's just using the gaming sessions to write the fantasy novel? How about that? That would be a GM to play for, right? Because then you could just do whatever you want, and then when you wrap things up and make the great story afterwards, hey, bingo, I got a novel on my hands. But yeah, I think Tolkien probably could have run a great RPG campaign, or Jules Verne, or George Lucas, maybe. Any of those guys that created different worlds and different ideas and had it in their heads the way the world worked in just a different way than it does, whether it was science fiction or fantasy or adventure or what have you. They would be able to run a good game that you'd enjoy. I like that idea. Novelists forever.
Hey, Jason here. Just listening to episode 84. I paused after your muster section. I don't think I'm going to touch where he's commenting on American culture and how D&D and role playing games fit into that. I'll just say that I'm not going to give commentary on other people's culture. As far as wargaming as sport, I've always disliked that. I can maybe see wargaming as sport in the same way video games are sport, which is another thing I don't agree with. So I don't see wargaming or video gaming as sport. If I've offended people, sorry. I definitely do not see role-playing games as sport. That is something that has popped up, and especially in OSR circles, it's popped up, this idea of war as sport and these games as sport, and I just don't agree with that. As far as the other parts he talks about, though, that you went to lengths to defend, I agree that they're valuable things to include in a primer or in a book like this. As far as the idea of experience points, I understand where he's coming from, and I don't disagree with him. The idea of feel-good experience points, like just for showing up, or for bringing pizza, or for making people laugh, or for making an achievement. Although, it depends how your game's built, because if you get experience, he talks about don't just give it to them just for being in the game for so long or hitting a certain thing. But I think there's something to be said for achievement experience points. If you finish the mission, you're given a mission, your characters go do that mission and come back. Is that not valuable experience? Should you not get experience for that? So I obviously, if you're playing a game with gold piece for experience, then that's what you do. But I don't think there's anything invalid about experience for completing missions or experience for failing missions. Maybe you don't get as much, but you still learn something. I think the problem with this section, though, is if you're not playing in a face-to-face group and you're not playing, 6 hours a week or something, you're never going to get, well, I shouldn't say never. It's going to take a heck of a long time to get anywhere with the experience required in these early games. If we're looking at the TSR era D&D, it's really hard to get to mid and high levels. We talk about tiers of play, but you're talking years and years. If you're playing 2-hour sessions online once a week or once every other week, the ability to level up at any kind of speed, it just isn't realistic. Now, if you want to keep the tenets he's talking about there, and I don't think there's a issue with keeping those tenets and a goal for XP system, then you almost need to slash the XP requirements. You'd have to fiddle with the tables and bring them down so you can reach those high-level play in a realistic amount of time. Hey, sorry I talked too long. I got cut off. I was just finishing up at the end of the last call, mentioning about experience points. And I think if you want to play gold for experience points in the way he's talking about in the book, I think you can definitely do that. But with modern play styles, with the idea that we're playing online 2-3 hour sessions, maybe every other week, that you really should probably rework the experience points tables and lower the amount of experience points needed, because you're never going to hit mid or high level tier play with the experience point values in the original books with the very limited amount we play these days if you're only doing gold for XP. That's all I wanted to say. So thank you for all that you're doing. And now let me listen to the rest of the show. Who knows? Maybe I'll call back.
Thank you, Jason. I'm going to touch on the sportsmanship concept, the sportsman idea, in a few minutes because Daniel also has something to say on that subject. But I did want to interject about what you said about XP and maybe having to change the way XP is from the older school games if you want to advance in a more current gaming climate where, 4, 6, or more hour sessions on a weekly or even bi-weekly places are not really the norm. The author actually is going to touch on some things, maybe not specifically for that reason, but tangentially on that reason, tangentially in terms of advancement and things like that, and about his experience with advancement in this next section that I'm going to have in my next episode where I cover muster. But I do agree that if you are looking to get those higher tiers of play, you do have to have either a strong way to accumulate experience, or you do have to maybe cut down the experience needs to reach certain levels. And certainly, again, if you're doing something which the author has mentioned in the book, not as strongly, but it's something that is also talked about a lot in OSR style play, old school style play, sandbox style play. Having multiple characters, of course, that makes it much harder if you're not playing the same character every session to advance. I've always been kind of dubious of the gold for XP thing. I don't know. I mean, I've read a lot of the older rule sets, and I don't know that it's as strongly emphasized in those books as a lot of the people who are advocates for that system say it is. It just seems like it's put forward as a suggested way, the way it was done, but not necessarily it's the only way. And I think it does have its limits, which you pointed out. There are things that you do and accomplish that are not going to result in gold because it makes it a very mercenary way of play. You've got to find gold and gems and jewels and treasures that can be exchanged for gold because if you read in the AD, I know in the AD&D DM's guide that they have to sell the items or exchange the items for gold to get the gold to get the XP. So it's not just a matter of gaining things, but and then there's an argument I guess to be had about, well, if you get other knowledge, that other knowledge benefits the player or the character within the game, that you don't need to give XP for it too. If you gain the knowledge to gain more powerful spells or to brew a strong potion or something along that lines, or where a powerful artifact is related, and that may be at the end of a journey or a quest or something. So should you get points for that when the knowledge is its own reward? There's an argument to be made for that either way, but I get exactly what you're saying, that okay, you set out to accomplish the thing. So now you've accomplished the thing, and what if you only found 50 gold in the process? What then? But there does need to be a way to have consistent gaining of XP, whether it's you go with the gold for XP or you go with session XP or you go with quest XP, or I'm sure other people can come up with other systems than I can. But you do need a way to make sure that there is advancement, because otherwise you get frustration, and frustration is one of the things that can end a campaign and kill a group. So thank you for that, and I'll get back to the sportsmanship part in just a little while.
Hey, Big Phantom, Daniel calling back again. Driving now, sorry about the noise. So you just did the chapter on sportsmanship, and it's really interesting. I totally agree with you. I think that because of the nature of the book and the way he's writing it, he's trying to make it feel very academic, or however you want to say it. It's a primer or whatever. Having something like that's important for the book. But I also think it's important in general, because I think that you are 100% right. More and more people are playing different ways, and not necessarily with their friends. Maybe they become friends. But the reality is that everybody that I play D&D with now, who many of them I played with for years and years, they were all, I played in person. They were all complete strangers. I met all of them either through Meetup or online or in gaming stores or whatever. So we are playing with people that we've never met before. So it's nice to have kind of an idea, right? And what I think is really interesting about this is that this is effectively wrapped up in sportsmanship, maybe to make it more palatable to certain people. But this is effectively safety tools. It's effectively session zeros. It's effectively say something when something's going this way. That's really what safety tools are. They're just a more formalized version of what they're calling sportsmanship. It's a set of ideas, a set of limits, a position that the table agrees to before you start playing. So it's just funny because, you had mentioned that in your response to me, that was one of those things that people bounce off, right? But the reality is it's all about how you frame it, right? For some reason, calling it sportsmanship is cool. Calling it a safety tool is not, to some people. To me, both work. It doesn't really matter to me. I don't love connecting D&D to sports. I think that's kind of a bad way to look at it, because I think the mentality in most sports is win-win-win, and I think the mentality in D&D is not that. No matter how much you want to say, oh, when you're playing a sport, it's all about how you play the game. No, it's not. People that play sports want to win. So I guess people that are sporty can tell me I'm wrong, but that's very much been my experience with sports. People are very competitive, and they do these things that you're calling sportsmanship or non-sportsmanship quite a bit. It's actually quite common. So sadly, even in professional athletes. But we are people and we get emotional, so I guess that's natural. But anyways, I thought it was interesting that if you broke those down and restated them in a different way, they're effectively, a lot of things are safety tools, or brought up in the safety tool conversation. I don't know if they're safety tools per se. So anyways, really cool. And of course, I agree with it. I agree 100%. I think you need to have some kind of a group understanding. There needs to be a way to discuss when things go funny, and people should call out somebody when they're doing something that is unsportsmanlike. Cool. Love it. You're going to do one more section, so I shall listen.
So thank you for that, Daniel. And as you can probably tell, listeners, that that is one of several calls that Daniel sent me. So I'm playing them a little out of order to try to get, again, trying to keep some themes together, since both Jason and Daniel talked about sportsmanship and how it relates to RPGs. And I do think I agree with Daniel on this one, that when he's talking about sportsmanship, he's not specifically talking about sports, that he's talking about what we refer to as sportsmanship, what some people might refer to as teamwork, uh, uh, character building things that you're supposed to learn by playing team sports, how to play well with others, how to act as part of a team, how to support one another. And that could be safety tools, that could be social contract, or he chose the word sportsmanship, and I think a lot of that is he's approaching this both from an academic concept and from someone who is from another country. English is I'm sure, his second language, maybe one of many. It may be his third or fourth language, because I know a lot of folks in Europe speak many languages. So he's looking at words differently than we do, because we have a different cultural context to them sometimes, of sportsmanship. And I do fall in line with what both Daniel and Jason are saying about D&D as sports, not being as sports. Video games, my first reaction has always been, especially when they were they had I think some video game tournaments on like ESPN one time, one of the ESPN channels, was, is that really sports? And I always had that reaction when the World Series of Poker is on there. It's like, yeah, that's not a sport, okay? Because to me, sports is, the emphasis to me on sports is the physical. It's a physical achievement. Yes, there are mental and team aspects that you have to master to succeed at a high level, but at lower levels, the physical aspect can take you a long way if you just have the talent. And then to get to play at the highest level, you have to have a certain amount of physical talent, or at least physical ability, that you have worked hard to achieve, just to be able to try to compete on that level. So I've always envisioned sports, to me, the physical is the foundation of it. That's the difference between a sport and just a game. I think the other thing about not having role playing be a sport is there's a competitive aspect. And who are you competing with? Are you competing with the GM? Are you competing with the other players? There's endless discussions in RPG sphere, about player versus player concepts, and uh, hostile GM tactics, uh, killer GMs trying out to get the player characters. And in the Book of Muster, the author talks about how GMs have to serve the dual role of the creator of the world, who's trying to help the players uh, achieve the adventures, the experience that they want, and then on the other hand, being a neutral arbitrator of the rules. But that's not a competitive aspect. It's not the GM trying to win when he's being that neutral arbitrator. It's the GM being more like the officials on a field, making sure everyone, both the players and their antagonists within the game world, are playing by the rules. So I agree that mixing that metaphor can go too far, because you do see folks talking about winning at RPGs, and some people say that kind of tongue in cheek, and some people say that, well, if you're playing and you're having fun, you're winning. But there are those who advocate it as, uh, you know, a type of competition among the players or between the players and the GM to control the game. You see some of that in some of the more niche parts of the RPGs, and I think that's just a very toxic idea. That's my opinion. But yeah, I think in terms of sportsmanship, the author is more referring to what we think of as the positive aspects, the team building aspects of sports. And I think those things are talked about within the RPG sphere, just in different language, like Daniel said. So I agree with both of y'all on pretty much every. I think I agreed with you on pretty much every point, or maybe I didn't. Let me know if I didn't. So this next call from Daniel is actually the first call that he called in for the last episode. I completely blanked on until just now on the middle part of this call. I remember the first part. I remember the last part, but I blanked on the middle. And in it, Daniel says a lot of the things that I just said to Jason about in terms of how to award XP. So we were, I guess it influenced my unconscious. You influenced my unconscious mind, Daniel, with part of this call.
Hey, Pink Phantom, it is Daniel. I realized that I called EOTB ETOB, but at least I did it consistently. I apologize, EOTB, for getting your name wrong. Pretty cool stuff, though. I'm just digging into the next episode, which is you're in Muster now, talking about experience points, and I think it's really interesting. Again, I'm taking it with the point of view of the author, right? Because it's interesting. I guess what they're saying so far is, you haven't started talking about it yet, that you shouldn't just willy-nilly give out XP, but then they say that, there's no time that you should give out XP just for being there. But I don't know if that's true, because depends on your campaign, right? Like, if the campaign means that your characters are if to get to the goal of that day is to just go through, a caravan route and nothing happens and you get to the other side, should you get no XP? I mean, your character did the thing. So again, I'm not so sure that I agree with that. I think there's lots of different ways to do XP. And again, I know they're being very specific to their campaign. I mean, I tend to do XP for gold, which is probably what they're going to say that you do, or maybe killing monsters. But I think that milestone XP and milestone achievement and stuff like that is also very viable depending on your game. But again, maybe that's not in their mind what is, I guess, the wargaming way. So it's really interesting. I mostly called in so far, though, to correct my naming somebody wrong. So again, sorry, EOTB, about that. Great stuff, though. I really like the pummeling conversation. I don't know, Jason brought up an interesting point, but I understand where what you're saying. It does say strike. I was talking to Jason actually the other day, and I think we're going to try to get together and do a bunch of fights and see which one if each one makes a difference. Because my thought is that the way EOTB has said it pummeling would be really powerful, and it already is pretty powerful in AD&D. But maybe that's cool, and maybe it doesn't really actually make that much of a difference. I found that a lot of times with mechanics, we think something's going to really change it dramatically, and then you do it, and it's like, well, it's not that different. It's just a little different, and it works. So, yeah, anyways, that's I'll probably call back in, because I know you have that episode is like over an hour, your episode, and I've only I think I'm 5 minutes into it, if that. So keep up the good work. I'll talk to you later.
So I think it should be obvious from my response to Jason that I agree with what you just said about awarding experience in different ways, having different ways to award experience, because there could be non-fungible ways of accomplishments of player characters within the game. as for that last part, that sounds fascinating. You and Jason doing pummeling. I'd be very interested to hear that when it comes out, or how it comes out if you don't end up recording it. But just how it comes out, because that sounds very interesting, and I agree. The ideas that EOTB put forward are very evocative of to me. I immediately went to boxing, the idea of boxing and combos, and the ebb and flow that would lead to, where one combatant could just land a punch and take control, because it just landing punch on punch on punch on top of that, and take control of a fight. And what would you have to do to get back into the fight from that? So that's going to be very interesting when it comes out. Thank you for doing that.
Hey, Pink Phantom, Daniel calling in about the last part of Muster. You're about to start the Tales of the Dragon Slayer, so I'll probably call in again, depending on when I finish it. Anyways, the scholastic part's interesting to me. I like as usual, I like what you say better than what he says. And your first connection to like the pulps really, really made sense to me, about the idea that something that would have been seen as kind of not necessarily scholastic, we'll call it. These were like throwaway magazines. People didn't, these authors, some of them used false names because they didn't want to even be associated with it, right? But when we look back at it today, I mean, there's college courses about these authors, and some of them are esteemed now, So it's really interesting how that shifts, right? What was popular culture and kind of looked down upon can become something that people realize later. Oh, we were putting it down because whatever, it was for the everyman, but really it's still great, So I like that attitude. The other, when you came back to and talked about this kind of in-between part, like what are we being true to, the history or the genre or whatever, that's also really interesting. I don't know if I got that from what he said, but I like what you said there. I felt that the book itself was a little, we'll say, elitist in its presentation. But again, I'm not surprised. I haven't really agreed with the presentation on a lot of these things. Like I said, I kind of want Muster version 2 written by the Pink Phantom, where you just use your interpretations. Anyways, awesome episode. As always, I will possibly call back in about the Dragon Slayers. Who knows? Talk to you soon.
Yes, I think the author is trying to approach this from sort of a scholarly aspect, sort of an academic aspect, kind of taking into account, what you read on a lot of blogs about RPGs, where they're trying to get to some foundational concepts of the style of play in an RPG, and what that means and what that looks like, and how that works, not just from a mechanical aspect, but from the human and intellectual foundations of what an RPG is and what type of experience you're trying to have. And I think a lot of those concepts he's trying to put forward, particularly in that vein, in the scholastic vein, and when he talks about putting the campaign first, and when you're building the campaign, deciding what kind of experience you want to have, what kind of emulation or simulation you're doing. I think that's the part of this book I've had the hardest part wrapping my head around, and it's something I need to go back through and just really dig into those sections, and you know just really think about it in terms of what he's getting at, because I think there's something there, and I think it's probably at the crux of what he considers the wargaming way to be. It's not just about the logistics and keeping track of things and having levels and having hit points. I think that those he considers those mechanical aspects that you need to have, and parts that make the game meaningful. But I think there's more to it than that, and that's really something I was looking for in this book when I was picking up the book. The difference between the wargaming way and even some other old school ways that seem to really overlap it. In a Venn diagram, they would overlap with this style. But what is it that really uh, defines it as its own thing? And I think I think the key is in there somewhere, but I just haven't exactly found it. So I'm going to be like, doom guy running around the space station looking for keys to open the doors, apparently. But you have one more thing to call in about, so let's hear that.
Hey, Pink Phantom, Daniel from Man's Keep. Great actual play. Woof, that got brutal. I thought immediately when they saw the wolves, they would try to evade. So I can't remember why they didn't. I was driving at the time in traffic, so I might have just missed a roll there. But or maybe you just chose. Maybe you thought, we can take wolves. But anyways, to answer your question as far as I would handle it, it's a very interesting question. My gut says that a werewolf is a monster. That is to say that whether they're in human form or lycanthrope form, so wolf form in that case, they're a monster. So this decision that you make kind of has rippling effects that you have to consider. Because if the form of a human is all it takes for somebody to be able to charm person on someone, that means that any number of creatures that take human forms, let's say a gold dragon, could be charmed when they were a person, right? Because that's not them casting a polymorph spell, they change form, right? So if the wolf, when they turn into a human, is a human and can be charmed person, then that's an interesting thing. Now you might say, no, this is only for lycanthropes. I guess that's fine as well. But I like to think about that when I make rulings or I make decisions if it's not clearly spelled out in the book. Now I cannot remember if werewolves and lycanthropes are vulnerable to regular attacks in human form. And if I know they lose their armor class. If they are, then I take back what I said. Because then they really are turning into a human and they're not just a monster in human form. So I think I would use that as my guide. If you look at the rules and it says when in human form they can be hit by normal weapons, then I would say they truly turn into a human, and then charm person would be what you'd need, not charm monster. Simple as that. If it doesn't say that and they are hit only by silver and magic, even in human form, then I would say they're a monster and charm monster should stick. So that's very cool. I like how you did it. And I wonder if the werewolf, okay, so assuming that it's going to stay charmed, or even if it's not, if the werewolf is under the influence of a charm spell, I believe that they're supposed to do what they can to help the party. Like, that's kind of the general baseline. Again, I'm going off BX mostly. I haven't read AD&D in a long time. So I would think that because they would know that the person would become infected with going down like that, they would actually transform back into human right away to let the cleric know. And that would be interesting because one of two things is going to happen. Either they transform back and stay charmed, which is cool for the cleric, or they transform back and they're not charmed. But in either case, there's a good hint there that they'll see that they're a werewolf. So I feel like there's a very good chance they'll be able to figure it out before Cudgel becomes a victim to the to the lycanthropy. Now, what's interesting here is I'm not sure. I'm guessing that you're going to do it this way, but one thing that people often forget when things like this happen is, what about that staff they were holding, right? If they went down in combat, the likelihood that they're holding that staff, and it's funny because when you had said they take one hand and they put it on him, I thought you were going to say the other hand they grabbed the staff, and they didn't. So is that +4 staff with disintegration ability gone now? I mean, definitely the rope of entanglement is gone. So that kind of sucks. Will they go out and look for it with a larger group and hunt down the werewolves? This could totally lead to all kinds of stuff. This is why random encounters are so cool in a sandbox type game, because they are one thing that can push your adventurers in different directions. They can become, I understand why people that run linear adventure paths don't like them as much, because they can just be a distraction or a resource drain. But here, this is an entire story element. So very cool. Very excited to see how this plays out. I'll talk to you soon.
Yes, that did escalate quickly. The large number was, 14 out of a potential 18. That's a pretty big number. I did think that things would go pretty well for the party. It is unusual that when I was rolling spells for Nantor, he didn't end up getting access to either Fireball or Lightning Bolt, but he did have Wall of Fire. And he probably could have used that in the first round. That might have made more of a difference than the slow spell did. Maybe it would have chased them off. Maybe it would have done more damage to them. But I think the fact that they were so close, I mean, they were only about 60 feet away. As far as why they didn't run, the one cleric had a mammal control ring, and my working assumption was that they wouldn't know by looking at them that they were werewolves. They would just see wolves. And you've got Nantor, who is an 8th level magic user. You had a 5th level cleric. You had a 3rd level cleric. You had Cudgel. You had 4 archers. So I was approaching it that they would think that that group would be good enough to defeat wolves, and especially with Nantor having the slow spell and having the rope of entanglement, that they would be able to essentially take some of the wolves out of the fight before the fight even started. And then it went poorly for them. So we ended up with a couple, 6 deaths, and then Cudgel down, and then just a few to escape. And as far as the staff goes, yep, you're absolutely right. That intelligent staff that has the disintegration ability, it was left behind, because when Cudgel went down, he dropped it, and so when Nantor decided to take off, he grabbed his new wolf friend. He grabbed Cudgel and Vaminos back to his tower. Essentially, I don't know if his actual tower. I guess with it being a fort and a big wall, he probably could have a tower of his own there. But yeah, that was, so it was left behind. My instinct is that when day comes and the werewolves are people, that they will retrieve some of those items. They didn't care about them as wolves, but they may, as werewolves, recognize them as treasure anyway, something valuable that maybe they can sell, if not use, when they're in people form. And as far as lycanthropy goes, according to the DM's guide, it specifically says you can't earn experience as a lycanthrope, but you can as an adventurer. So a fighter that is also a werewolf or a werebear or something, when they're in werebear form, werewolf form, they're not going to earn any experience from anything to do, but as a fighter, they still could. So I read that as a dual existence. So it's, monster when you're transformed, but when you're a man, you're just a man. So charm person, charm monster, I think there's something to be said there. How much of you is the monster? How much of you is the person? The DMG talks about conflicting alignments between the two halves. It talks about how it would take 2 years to control your transformation. Otherwise, you're just going to transform on the full moon all the time. You can make the argument that at that point you are fully monster. So that would be, so it could be that the man is still charmed, because at this point he's a wolf, or if he's a newfound wolf, maybe he's not. So that's something I'll have to ponder on and maybe roll some dice about and see how that works out. But yeah, I think at least initially you're two beings sharing the same body, and so that's different from being something like a changeling or doppelganger, or just a monster that can change its form. So if you don't have control of it, then really you're two different pieces. That's my concept anyway. That's my working concept for now. I may change my mind later. But it is an interesting question, so I thank you for bringing it up. And as far as the implications, yeah, we're going to see briefly some of the implications in my next episode, where I talk about Tales of the Dragon Slayers. So something to look forward to. The opening music of this podcast is Strength of the Titans, and the closing music is Late Night Radio, both by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license. Thank you for listening to Phantom Thoughts. I would love to hear your feedback. You don't have to be part of the show. If you want to contact me and let me know, hey, these are for your eyes only, I just wanted to give you thoughts, ideas, response, and it's really for your eyes or ears only, that's absolutely fine. I'd love to hear from you either way. So just let me know when you contact me. Just, I don't want to be part of the show. There are lots of different ways you can contact me. You can send me an email at phantomthoughtspodcast@gmail.com. And that can be a regular email, or you can attach an audio file to it. You can use the message button on my podcast site on podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/phantom thoughts. You can contact me via my Google Voice number, 864-209-1441. You can contact me via SpeakPipe at www.speakpipe.com/phantom thoughts. You can contact me on Discord, The Pink Phantom. All this contact information is listed in the show notes of every episode. And thank you for those who call in. Thank you for those who don't call in. I appreciate you listening and hope you'll listen again next time. Until then, I hope you have a great day.